News of the Times. Scotland Yard case. The jealous seamstress who stabbed her lover in broad daylight. A true crime in 1902. Welcome to News of the Times. In today's episode, we look at a story of jealousy, betrayal, and cold-blooded killing. In 1902, London was gripped by the scandalous trial of Kitty Byron, a young seamstress who shocked Edwardian society when she plunged a knife into her lover's chest in broad daylight. What drove this respectable working-class woman to commit such a violent act? Was it premeditated revenge or the desperate act of a woman scorned? In this gripping true crime case, we explore the dramatic courtroom scenes, the press frenzy, and the devastating aftermath of a crime that still haunts the pages of legal history. Step into the world of gaslight and scandal as we uncover the toxic love affair behind the killing, Kitty's own explosive testimony, and why the jury's verdict divided the nation. And in today's end of episode further particular segment, a young heir from India lands in a Bermondsey workhouse after deciding he hadn't earned his vast inheritance and promptly falls among thieves. So, brew a cup of something strong or restorative, adjust your moral compass to Edwardian, and prepare to be appalled in all the best ways. Jealousy, scandal, courtroom drama, and a stabbing in the city, no less. This is News of the Times, and the seamstress has something sharp to say. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Background. Kitty Byron. At just 23 years old, Kitty Byron was a young woman shaped by hardship and limited opportunity. Described in reports as slightly of figure and modestly dressed, she had worked as a dressmaker's apprentice and a barmaid, both common occupations for the working class women navigating Edwardian London. Her early life had been marked by instability. Orphaned young, she was raised in Liverpool, although she later moved to London, where she met Arthur Baker. Friends describe her as impressionable and emotional, with a strong sense of loyalty and dependency once attached to someone. At the time of the murder, Kitty was living in precarious lodgings, struggling financially and deeply entangled in what she believed to be a long-term romantic relationship. Her courtroom appearance, pale and quiet yet composed, captured the public's imagination and helped ignite fierce debates over class, gender and justice. Arthur Reginald Baker was 47 years old, a married man and a member of the London Stock Exchange, a position that placed him firmly in the ranks of Edwardian respectability. The son of a stockbroker, Baker followed in his father's professional footsteps and managed by all outward appearances to lead a successful and stable life. Privately, however, things were far less orderly. He was a known drinker, reportedly consuming whiskey nightly and frequenting pubs and bars across London. Despite his heavy and regular drinking, he remained functioning, even thriving in his career. This contrast between his personal excesses and public composure only added to his enigmatic image. Baker led a double life. While legally married and maintaining his domestic household, he also carried on a long-term affair with Kitty Byron, a much younger woman who believed herself his future wife. He allegedly promised marriage, although it later became clear that he had no such intention. To Kitty, he was charming, generous, and constant, but to the outside world, Baker appeared as a man compartmentalizing his vices, juggling whiskey, infidelity, and stock trading with unnerving ease. It was this carefully maintained illusion that would come crashing down in the most brutal and public fashion imaginable. From the Daily Express, the 11th of November 1902, City Tragedy. Stockbroker murdered by a woman. A mysterious deed. While the city was celebrating the coming of the new Lord Mayor, a man was stabbed to death almost within a stone's throw of the Mansion House in Post Office Court in Lombard Street yesterday afternoon. Few murders have been more dramatic or sensational. A young and attractive woman suddenly drew a knife and plunged it twice into the body of her companion, a well-dressed man of about 40 years of age. It was the busiest time of the day in the city, and Lombard Street was crowded with people. The man died on the way to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where it was stated that his name was Arthur Reginald Baker, a member of the Stock Exchange. According to a broker who was seen last night, Arthur Reginald Baker had been well known on the Stock Exchange, having been a member since 1891. The tragedy occurred at about 2:20 o'clock in front of the Lombard Street Post Office. The girl, who is known by sight to several post office clerks, called at the office at about 2 o'clock and sent an express letter to Mr. Baker at the Stock Exchange. After dispatching the letter, the woman waited at the counter. She exhibited some emotion and kept both hands in her muff, meanwhile closely scrutinizing every person entering the post office. A long wait. 15 minutes passed. The busy clerks paid no attention to the woman who had stationed herself near the door. Suddenly she stepped forward and greeted a well-dressed man who entered from the doors nearest Lombard Street. He wore tweeds and was a typical city man in appearance. For several minutes the couple engaged in conversation near the counter. Then their voices rose, and the clerks noticed that they were quarrelling. There were several versions regarding this quarrel, but it is said that the woman referred to a number of express letters which she had sent the man. Finally, the man turned towards the street with a gesture imitating that he wished to end the interview. He passed through the door, and the woman followed, still nervously handling her muff. Suddenly, she pulled a knife from the muff and dealt the man a terrific blow in the back. As he half staggered, then partially turned around with one foot on the lower step, it is said the woman withdrew the weapon and struck again, this time plunging it into his left breast. The man gasped and fell heavily forward, his head striking the stone pavement. A messenger boy gave the alarm, and the two clerks who were hurrying up the court seized the woman, who was leaning over the prostrated form as though preparing to strike a third blow. The tragedy took place in less than 5 seconds, so quickly in fact that a clerk emerging from an office at one end of the court thought the man had merely fainted and ran to fetch a glass of water. A crowd soon gathered, choking Post Office Court and Lombard Street, so that it was with difficulty the police could get through to the wounded man. Died on the way. He was taken with all possible speed in an ambulance to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, but when the surgeon examined him, he had been dead for several minutes. In addition to the stab wounds in the back and the breast, the latter penetrating the heart, there was an ugly cut on the head which was made in falling. This wound gave rise to the rumour that the man had been stabbed in the head. Among the documents found on the body of the dead man at St. Bartholomew's was one showing that his wife had instituted a suit of divorce on November the 1st. The woman who was taken to Cloak Lane police station gave her name as Kitty Byron. She was neatly dressed in black and apparently was about 23 years of age. She has dark hair and eyes and strongly marked features. She was charged last night with wilful murder, but made no answer, maintaining a sullen composure. She was afterwards placed in a cell and sat there unmoved by the hilarious singing of half a dozen prisoners in the cells around her. The knife with which the murder was committed is a broad-bladed clasp knife, very sharp, and of the pattern used by salmon fishers and hunters. Baker's landlady's story. Inquiries made at the house in Duke Street, Great Portland Street, last evening, revealed the fact that Mr. Baker had lived there for 8 or 9 weeks past in company with a young woman who is described as being rather good-looking. As to whether or not this is the woman who is at present in custody, the landlady was unable to state. In her presence, Mr. Baker had always addressed his companion as Mrs. Baker, and they had lived together as man and wife. The couple shared a bed sitting room, plainly furnished, on the ground floor of the house. The landlady was quite in ignorance as to Baker's occupation, and she had no knowledge of his relatives. He had never mentioned them to her. Like many other men in the city, he left home early morning and returned in the evening, and his business and his whereabouts during the day were matters of no concern to those with whom he resided. But he was always well furnished with means. Yesterday morning, Baker left the house at about 10 or 10:30 and, as was usual with him, said nothing as to the time at which he might be expected home. About an hour later, Mrs. Baker departed. Nothing more was seen or heard of them until news was brought of Mr. Baker's death. Last evening, Baker's apartments were visited by 2 detectives of the city police force, and his belongings and papers were searched, but it is understood that nothing was discovered there that could give any clue as to Baker's relatives. Miss Byron will be brought before the Lord Mayor at the Mansion House this morning, when, pending the inquest, former evidence will be taken. Kitty Byron's first appearance before the court drew an extraordinary crowd, not of the usual spectators, but of city men, clerks, and stockbrokers, all eager to glimpse the young woman who had brought bloody scandal into the heart of Lombard Street. She appeared pale but composed, a neat figure in a dark skirt and a sailor hat, her youth and delicacy sharply at odds with the violent act she was accused of. As Inspector Fox of the Cloak Lane police station took the stand, Kitty watched him steadily from the dock, seeming both resigned and resolute. What followed silenced any murmurs in the courtroom. Upon arrest, she had said without hesitation, "I killed him willingly, and he deserved it, and the sooner I am killed, the better." But later, in the quiet of her cell, her words changed. "I brought the knife to hit him," she said, "but I didn't know I was killing him." Whether this was remorse, confusion, or something more complex, the court and the nation would soon have to decide. From the Daily Express, the 12th of November, 1902. The City Tragedy. Admissions of a girl charged with murder. The crowd which struggled for admission to the little courtroom was unusual in character as well as size. It was composed largely of city men, including many stockbrokers who were in court to see the dressmaker accused of stabbing Arthur Reginald Baker in Lombard Street on Monday afternoon. As the jailer called Kitty Byron, a slender, dark-eyed girl came timidly up the stairs, shrinking a little when she saw the dense throng about her. Then, looking around the courtroom, she advanced composedly into the dock and leant on the iron railing. The girl was very white, but when the jailer asked her if she felt faint, she shook her head. She gave him a grateful look, however, when he placed a chair for her in the corner of the dock, and after sitting down, she gazed steadily, obvious of the curious spectators, at Inspector Fox, who entered the witness box to relate the story of her arrest. Miss Byron is decidedly prepossessing in appearance. She wore a dark skirt and a jacket with a high linen collar and a sailor hat of white straw. She was very neat, and her features, although somewhat thin, are attractive. She looked younger than her age, which is given on the charge sheet as 23. History of Miss Byron. Miss Byron comes of a highly respectable family. She formerly lived in Pimlico, but on the death of her father, the family moved to Leytonstone, where her widowed mother is living at present with her married son, his wife, and their 3 small children, and a younger sister of the prisoner, aged at about 14. The Byron family occupy a pretty little villa in Napier Road, and are spoken highly of in the neighbourhood. The prisoner was employed as a milliner's assistant early this year at Madame Timmery's Court dressmaking establishment in Old Burlington Street. It was stated last night by a representative of Madame Timony that Miss Byron was forced to leave in June last owing to her apparent inability to keep proper hours. She was described by her former associates at the establishment as being a very pleasant girl, but very reticent about her private affairs. Madame Liard, who keeps lodgers in Duke Street, stated to an express representative that Mr. Arthur Reginald Baker first came to her house about 3 months ago with another gentleman. Mr. Baker engaged apartments for himself, and his wife, Miss Byron, arrived several weeks latterly. The couple first occupied a suite of 2 rooms, but afterwards changed to a bed-sitting room. In this room, which had been sealed up, are contained the personal effects of the murdered man and the prisoner, including a trunk and a portmanteau, which have been taken possession of by the police. Divorce proceedings begun. Madame Liard stating that she had been forced to give the couple notice to leave on Friday last owing to their bitter quarrelling. On Monday morning, the prisoner told her that Mr. Baker had been served with a citation in a divorce at the insistence of his wife, adding that she, the prisoner, was named as co-respondent. Mr. Baker left the house as a rule at about 10 o'clock every morning and went back sometimes at 4 o'clock. Miss Byron frequently went out during the day. Neither of them ever had any callers, and nothing was known at the house regarding the prisoner's family or friends. The citation in divorce against Baker, which was taken by his wife, Mrs. Alexandra Baker, was served on November the 4th at the Duke Street apartment by ex-Detective Inspector Littlechild, who is now in charge of a private inquiry agency. Arthur Reginald Baker, aged 43, was the son of a prominent London solicitor and had strong family ties across southern England. Born in Crawley in Sussex, he married Miss Harrison in 1897, the daughter of Alderman J. Harrison, former mayor of both Marlborough and Torquay. The couple lived in West Kensington until January of that year, after which they ceased living together, although no formal separation had been arranged. Mrs. Baker, residing with her father at the Queen's Hotel in Torquay, later discovered that her husband had taken up with Kitty Byron. Acting on legal advice, she filed for divorce, with the writ served on November the 1st. Baker's connections included Mr. Perkins, the former mayor of Taunton, and Mr. Leighton of Cambridge, both brothers-in-law. From the Daily Express, the 13th of November 1902, Kitty Byron in prison. Visits from members of her family. Kitty Byron has been removed to Brixton Jail, where she was visited yesterday by her brother and several other members of the family. She has maintained her composure and inquired several times after her mother and sister. The apartment which the couple shared is a small back room on the ground floor, and when examined by the detectives, it was in a state of great disorder, having been sealed up exactly as Miss Byron left it on Monday afternoon. Half a dozen empty bottles bearing the label of a public house nearby were found in the room. Mr. Baker was in the habit of sending Mrs. Baker out for whisky, said the landlady yesterday. She was a teetotaler, and she didn't want to visit the public houses. Mr. Baker forced her to, however. One night she went out with an empty bottle when he was worse than usual. After a time she came back, and putting the bottle and the money on the table said, "I cannot go in where all the men are. I don't care what he does to me." As the investigation deepened, a clearer and far darker picture of life behind closed doors began to emerge. What had once been painted as a tragic love story unravelled into something far more disturbing. Witness after witness stepped forward, not only to recount the day of the killing, but to shed light on the toxic, violent relationship that had been spiralling towards its fateful end. From the very moment Kitty Byron walked into a cutler's shop with unsettling precision about the type of knife she wanted, to the neighbours who described the brutal arguments, the beatings, and the desperate apologies that followed. What came to light in court was not merely a crime of passion, but perhaps the final act in a long-suffering pattern of control, fear, and entrapment. From the Daily Express, the 18th of November 1902, The City Tragedy. Evidence as to the ill usage of Miss Byron. Buying the knife. James Moore, a cutler of Oxford Street, was then called. He stated, "At about 12 o'clock last Monday afternoon," said he, "a young lady came into the store and asked to see a knife. I was about to show her an ordinary pocket knife when she said, 'I want a strong bladed knife or a long bladed knife.' I then showed her the knife. In showing it to her, I had opened the blade, which works with a spring. I then stooped down to get another knife and found her trying to close the blade. I remarked, 'Oh no, you will not be able to close it. It has a lock,' on which she said, 'Oh, I don't know. I have a firm grip.' Suiting the action to the word, she grasped my hand. I said, 'Of course you know best, but it is not a lady's knife. Is it for your own use?' She said, 'Yes.' 'Is it nice and sharp?' Then she added, 'How much?' I told her 6 shillings. "Haven't you one for 5 shillings?" she asked. I said, "No, I will charge you 5 shillings and 6pence," and she paid me that in silver. His customer resembled the photograph of Miss Byron produced. Raphael Lilliard of Duke Street was called. His mother let lodgings to Baker when he came to the house on July the 22nd. Mrs. Baker, Kitty Byron, came 2 days afterwards. Liard declared that Miss Byron was always sober, and he described Baker as a shocking drunkard, and said he sometimes sent his wife, Miss Byron, out for whisky. He had seen Baker drink half a tumbler of whisky neat. Often Mr. Baker gave Miss Byron a good hiding. She told his mother that Baker had tried to strangle her. He often heard Baker say, "Well, I'll kill you," and heard her screaming. Baker left the house at about 9:30 on Monday morning. He had been given a week's notice to leave on Saturday because of a violent quarrel with the accused girl late on Friday night. He saw Madame Liard on Monday, warning to ask if he might remain. She loved him. Liard continued that Mrs. Baker went to see his mother at about 11 a.m. on Monday and apologized for the previous night's disturbance. He saw her leave the house crying. Miss Byron told Madame Lilliard she was not married to Baker, and Madame Lilliard said, "Why don't you leave him?" Miss Byron is alleged to have replied, "I love him very much. I could not get work anywhere because I have no character. Mr. Baker took me from my work." Mr. Humphreys then asked whether Mr. Baker had not made allegations of immoral character against Miss Byron to Mrs. Liard. "Yes," replied Mrs. Liard, and that he would stop on in the room after he had got rid of her. Medical testimony. Dr. Reginald Thompson testified that Arthur Reginald Baker died from a single stab wound to the chest. The blade had pierced through the second rib, entering the left lung, and severed a main artery near the heart, causing rapid internal bleeding and death. When asked if considerable force would have been needed to inflict such a wound, Dr. Thompson responded that it would have required a strong and deliberate thrust. Despite the swirling press attention and a courtroom packed with curious onlookers, Kitty Byron held herself with a poise that surprised many. Pale but composed, she stood at the railing of the dock without hesitation, refusing a chair and calmly meeting the stares of the crowd with flashing eyes and a clenched jaw. Though not conventionally beautiful, her determined expression and quiet defiance left a distinct impression. And it was perhaps that same mix of strength, vulnerability, and a visible strain that lingered in the minds of the coroner's jury. In a surprising twist, they returned a verdict not of murder, but of manslaughter, citing an impulsive act without malice or premeditation. The room was stunned. When pressed for clarity, the jury foreman stood firm. They did not believe she had set out to kill. The fatal act, as they concluded, had been one of the moment, tragic but not cold-blooded. From the Daily Express, the 21st of November, 1902, without malice. Remarkable verdict in the city tragedy. Miss Byron's confession. After listening to the final and most dramatic chapter in the tragedy of Arthur Reginald Baker's death, the coroner's jury yesterday returned a verdict of manslaughter against Kitty Byron, by whom he was stabbed in Post Office Court in Lombard Street on November the 10th. The finding created some surprise. "Do you mean unlawful killing without malice?" asked the coroner. "Yes," replied the foreman. "Killing on the impulse of the moment. We do not believe that she went there with the intention of killing him." "Do I understand there was no malice?" repeated Dr. Waldo. "Exactly. She did not go there with the intention of killing. We are unanimous." As the investigation unfolded and public speculation swirled, a fuller picture of Kitty Byron's state of mind began to emerge, not from the witness box or the press, but from within the quiet confines of her police cell. It was there, in the hours following the murder, that she reportedly opened up to a wardress, offering a haunting account of the day's events and the emotional unravelling that led to tragedy. While Kitty Byron lay in a cell in Cloak Lane Police Station a few hours after the tragedy, she is alleged to have recounted to a wardress the incidents of that day leading to the terrible denouement in Post Office Court. "I pulled a knife from my muff and plunged it into him," Miss Byron is said to have exclaimed. "I think I went completely, absolutely mad, and I remember no more until I came round." The wardress, Ellen Affleck, had gone into Miss Byron's cell at about 9 o'clock that night. Through the kindness of Inspector Fox, the prisoner had been given a comfortable bed instead of the usual rough wooden bench. The wardress sat down on the foot of the bed, and Miss Byron told her story in broken sentences. A moment of madness. As repeated by the wardress yesterday in a hushed and crowded courtroom, it was pitiful enough. Miss Byron had been on affectionate terms with Baker on the morning of the murder, despite the bitter quarrel of the previous Friday night. "Oh, my poor Reggie," Miss Byron exclaimed. "When he gave me a cup of tea in bed this morning, I kissed him, little thinking that it would be the last time I would ever do so." After Baker had left for the stock exchange, Isabel Kingset, the housemaid, told Miss Byron that Baker had arranged to discard her. "Will he?" replied Miss Byron. "I will kill him before the day is out." She arose, dressed herself, and saw Madame Liard, to whom she apologized for the disturbance made during Friday night's quarrel. Then she went out, half wild with grief, drank some brandy, bought a knife and drank some more brandy, and upon summoning Baker to the Lombard Street office, they quarrelled unexpectedly about twopence. She pressed him for the money. He became angry and exclaimed, "I have not got it." "And with that," continued Miss Byron to the wardress, "I pulled the knife out and I plunged it into him." The full misery of Kitty Byron's life in Duke Street came to light through the testimony of Madame Adrienne Liard, the kindly grey-haired landlady who had offered the young woman both lodging and sympathy. Kitty had quietly confided that she was not in fact married to Mr. Baker, a man whose drinking and violent temper had become increasingly difficult to conceal. On the Friday before the murder, a fierce row erupted. Madame Liard entered their disorderly room to find torn bedding strewn across the floor and a shredded hat. Baker, drunk and unsteady, handing over a worthless cheque for the rent. Kitty, although sober, attempted to brush it off with a strained smile. "Oh, we've just been playing milliner." But later that night, the argument resumed with such fury that Kitty fled, half-dressed, into the hallway, visibly trembling. Still, she insisted, "Nothing is the matter." The next morning, Baker was given notice. He claimed she had been drunk. At that, Kitty finally dropped the pretense. "You've been drunk all day," she said. Baker's response was chillingly flippant. "Put it all on my shoulders. They are broad." Discarded. When Baker pleaded with Madame Liard to be allowed to stay, she said she would not have him for £10 a week. Baker then said, "She, Miss Byron, is not my wife. She is no class. She will go tomorrow." When Miss Byron came a short time afterwards to Madame Liard's to apologise for the disturbance, she admitted to Madame Liard that Mr. Baker had told her that she would have to go next day. She knew this meant she would have to go alone. Isabel Kingset, the housemaid, said Miss Byron came downstairs after Madame Liard. She had frequently seen bruises on Miss Byron's body, which were caused, according to Miss Byron, by Baker's ill treatment. The verdict of the coroner's jury, it should be pointed out, will not necessarily have any bearing either on the magisterial committal of the accused or on her trial, although it will, of course, be presented to the grand jury together with the committal. In the event of the magistrate committing Miss Byron on the murder charge, the grand jury may return a true bill either upon the charge of murder or upon the less serious one of manslaughter, and it will then be for the ordinary jury to decide which, if either, of the charge is proved. Last night the accused woman was informed of the verdict the coroner's jury had returned, but either she was too ill or did not understand the difference between murder and manslaughter, for she made no reply except her oft-repeated observation, "Oh, my poor Reggie." As expected, the coroner's jury finding of manslaughter held no legal weight. At the Old Bailey, the recorder made clear that their verdict was not binding, and that the law presumes all homicide to be murder unless proven otherwise. A true bill for murder was duly returned, and Kitty Byron would now stand trial accordingly. And so, with the inquest behind her and a full charge of murder now confirmed, Kitty Byron was brought before the court for trial. Pale, visibly weakened and trembling, she could barely whisper her plea, but as the grim details of the case unfolded before a hushed courtroom, the emotional weight of the proceedings became impossible to ignore, not only for the accused, but for the jury themselves. From the Daily Express, the 18th of December 1902, Emma Byron's doom. Touching close of the city murder trial. Jury asks for mercy. The girl looked thin and ill. She trembled violently as the indictment was read, and seemed about to collapse, but managed to respond, "Not guilty," in a faint voice, and then sank gratefully into a proffered chair. Throughout the trial, her emotion was constantly apparent. For a few moments she would seemingly follow the evidence, wrinkling her brow as though trying to fix her mind onto the subject. Then her gaze would wander over the courtroom while her head constantly swayed from side to side. The slightest allusion by the witness, counsel or judge to the murdered man or his wounds brought her attention back, and while two surgeons described his injuries, she wept bitterly. Powerful speech for the defence. Mr. Dickens made a powerful speech in his client's behalf, and her agitation was not greater even when the verdict was announced than when he described her great love for the man she had killed. She buried her face in her hands as he laid stress on her sticking to him, although she was beaten, half-strangled, and treated brutally. There was not a single word of ill uttered against him. She bought the knife, declared Dickens, not to kill him with, but to try to win him back by making a show of committing suicide, or even by committing suicide before him. She is a girl of historical disposition, of dramatic instincts. She has planned this demonstration of suicide before Baker. The theory which Mr. Dickens had so touchingly presented to his address concerning Miss Byron's supposed plan for suicide was definitely pulled to pieces by Mr. Justice Darling in his charge to the jury. In the dingy, crowded old court of the Old Bailey, at the close of a cheerless winter's day, Emma Byron was sentenced to death yesterday for the murder of Arthur Reginald Baker in Post Office Court in Lombard Street on November the 10th. The jury recommended her to mercy. Many tragedies mark the grim history of the old court, but none more pitiful than the tragedy of Emma Byron. Few who witnessed it last night will ever forget the picture of that slender, trembling girl as she leaned on the railings of the dock, her face pale in the flickering gaslight, her hands clasping and unclasping convulsively, and her quivering lips framing words of protest as she turned her gaze from the black-capped judge to the solemn chaplain beside him, and then to the jury which had convicted her. Denied twice. Twice she denied the justice of the verdict. Her tones were those of an obstinate child who did not recognise the importance of its statements. Guilty, the foreman had said. No, I am not, Emma Byron replied. To the stereotyped question why the death sentence would not be passed, she answered, I'm not guilty of wilful murder, in a low, despairing voice. Finally, when asked if she had any reason upon which to urge stay of execution, she again replied, no, in tones inaudible beyond the dock. And then, as the answer was repeated to the judge by the clerk, she was led by two wardresses, half fainting, to the cells. Petition for mercy. As the date of the execution loomed, public sentiment took a striking turn. Across London, voices rose in defence of Emma Kitty Byron, not in denial of her guilt, but in sympathy of her state of mind. The press reported that nearly 400 individuals from all walks of life descended on Giltspur Chambers in a single day to sign a formal petition for mercy. The argument was not one of innocence, but of emotional collapse. Supporters claimed that Kitty had not truly intended to kill Arthur Reginald Baker, that her despair had been so profound, her heartbreak so complete, that her original plan had been to take her own life in front of the man who had spurned her. Letters poured into the offices of the Daily Express, painting a portrait of public unease, a sense that, whatever her crime, to hang this young woman would be an act of cruelty rather than justice. From the Daily Express, the 24th of December, 1902. Miss Byron's future. His Majesty the King, exercising his merciful prerogative, has decided that the death sentence passed upon Miss Emma Byron for the murder of Reginald Baker shall not take effect. Miss Byron was reprieved some hours before the huge petition prepared on her behalf was presented to the Home Secretary. His Majesty has advised to respite the capital punishment to commutation to penal servitude for life. Kitty was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. From a modern perspective, we might ask, was her act a calculated revenge, or the act of a woman who had finally snapped under the weight of prolonged abuse, betrayal and abandonment. The Victorian justice system saw a woman scorned. Today, we might see a woman cornered. Further particulars. From crimes of passion to the peculiar perils of principle. Our next tale takes us not to the courtroom, but to the curious corridors of Bermondsey Workhouse, where a young heir with a sizable fortune waiting back home in India decided quite nobly and quite inconveniently that he simply hadn't earned it. What follows is a tale of unwanted riches, lofty morals, and the age-old hazard of falling amongst thieves, with just enough British understatement to make it all oddly endearing. From the Daily Mirror, the 21st of March, 1922. Unwanted riches. Heir to a fortune who ran away from India to earn own living. How an Indian youth who is heir to a fortune ran away from home and eventually found himself in Bermondsey Workhouse was related yesterday to the Lewisham Guardians. He was found in the district, the clerk stated, in a destitute condition. He was a lad of very independent opinions, said the clerk, and was entitled to a very large sum of money under the will of his father. Asserting that he did not personally ask for the money, he said he felt he was not entitled, not having earned it, and had come to England to earn his living. When he was independent, he added, he intended to return to India and take what was due to him. He had a certain amount of money when he came over, said the clerk, but he fell amongst thieves. Laughter. A cablegram was sent to his mother in India, who sent over a sum of money, and he has now been put in charge of a society in London which has agreed to assist him. The tale is done, the villain unmasked, the secrets revealed. If displeased, complain to the scriptwriter, although don't expect much. She's vanished quicker than tuppence on a market day. But if your curiosity's been well fed and your appetite for scandal satisfied, don't just stand there gawping. Like, subscribe, share. Spread it far and wide to friends, foes, fishmongers, chimney sweeps, and that odd gent who talks to pigeons. Every click keeps the stories coming and sends the YouTube algorithm into a proper tizzy, which, if you ask us, is the cherry atop the pudding. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, former chimney stoicism inspector and a current keeper of the Edwardian Sigh Registry.